Hello, my fellow theatre people. Today I come to you with a discussion about Love's Labours Lost. It's a tongue twister, and I'm not going to get into apostrophes, just to spoiler warning right here. However, this is going to be about the play, but it's also going to be about women of will. And, Emma Smith's This is Shakespeare, though actually it's more of her accompanying podcast, Approaching Shakespeare, because she doesn't have a chapter of Love's Labours Lost in her book, but she does have in her what I think of as her companion podcast, Approaching Shakespeare. So let's get into it. Love's Labours Lost. Definitely not on the top tier of the Shakespeare plays that people talk about. It's one of these ones that actually, it seems that people talk about, what contribution, this is a critic talking, what contribution has Shakespeare made Shakespeare performance made to scholarship. And this actually I'm getting from Emma Smith in her podcast, and saying that, we know that it's good to run the Shakespeare history plays in sequence. You got a build up of the story, but also that, hey, Love's Labours Lost actually works as a theater piece. Surprise! And indeed, I watched, I'll link it down below. We'll see if this works for people outside of Canada, because there's always that sticky thing of, pity, only in Canada, you say? That's a very lame reference, that sometimes the regional stuff doesn't work. I watched the Stratford version, and I'll put a link to their website the CBC's website, where they have a performance of, actually they've got performances of, I found this later, they've got Coriolanus, they got Love's Labours Lost, they've got a ton of stuff on there. If you're a Canadian, you can definitely watch it. If you're outside of Canada, who knows, maybe they haven't gated it or not. I'm sorry if they have. It sucks. As a Canadian, I often get gated from stuff that's been bought by rights holders in Canada, but they're not showing it anywhere where everybody else gets to see it. So yeah, that sucks. So that said, hey, I watched Love's Labours Lost, and I really enjoyed it. And here I'm gonna start out with, a little description, my reaction to it. It's where we open in this court where a king and his three friends have immediately swear off all women. We're going to devote ourselves to studying, no women within like a certain amount of distance, and we're not going to talk to them, and you're going to give your oath to this. And of course, what happens? But the queen of a princess of France shows up with her three ladies, and surprise, surprise, everybody falls in love. Right off the bat. They may even fall in love before. In fact, before they even sign the bloody agreement, the main kind of smart fellow, Baron, actually points out, you've got this princess of France coming to see you, so you've already screwed up your own thing. And the king Ferdinand of Navarre, I'm going to say Navarre, is like, oops, I forgot that. He's kind of a bonehead that way, but they sign it anyways. And of course, what happens? Everybody, yes, falls in love. There's letters that get confused and sent to the wrong people. They dress up as Muscovites. There's hilarious, is he a Spaniard? Yes, a hilarious, fantastical Spaniard. There's a country bumpkin, Cotard, who makes all kind of malapropisms. There is a very Latinate, school teacher who, maybe, is probably, this is a spirit animal for booktubers here, who goes on about language in a very particular type of booktuber. Obviously not me. I have clueless about my Latinate kind of pickiness. But we have all that. We have all this wonderful kind of cream puff of a plot, lots of kind of just fun language play and people clashing and stuff like that. And the men don't come off well. And then suddenly, and you think it's all building to like, and then we're just going to have happy ending kind of thing at the end. But this is Love's Labours Lost. And in the end, it is a loss. The expect what you expect to happen, the inevitability to happen, doesn't happen. And we end with a little bit of kind of a melancholy song, and then you this way, that us that this way. I'm butchering the language there, but that gives you the general idea. And it was like, oh well, that was, and I kind of came away from it as, oh well, this is a kind of a fun, kind of like a delightful evening. This is a good good date movie. You'd come to it and you kind of come out kind of going, kind of smiling about it, even though at the end it ends on a sad note. But it's kind of that, there's me. It's like, I love that kind of little bit of melancholy mixed with my comedy. So that's the play. That's sort of my reaction to it, of like, oh well, that was fun, that was enjoyable. It was a good night out at the theater. Then we get to Women of Will, which, if you tuned in last time, Women of Will is coming from very much perspective of Tina Packer, of that Shakespeare develops over the course of his plays. He goes from being kind of a dopey guy who's kind of misogynistic and views women as objects, to kind of deepening in his understanding of the feminine, basically saying in the end, like, he writes as a woman, and through that, and Love's Labour's Lost, at least in the first sections, because I have not finished the book yet. She develops this whole thing of like during the plague years, he's kind of gotten enmeshed in this group, this kind of very intellectual group of folks. He's met the Dark Lady, and she says that the Dark Lady is this Amelia Bassano, Amelia Lanier, which she's a poet in her own right, and she deepens Shakespeare's knowledge. And indeed, what she says is that in the first, this is Packer's quote from Packer's book, in the first version that Shakespeare wrote of Love's Labour's Lost, of the play, he had the men proposing to the women and the women accepting, a conventional ending. That play is called Love's Labour's Won. I'll get to that in a moment. And early on, it played to a small circle of friends, academics, and courtiers surrounding Southampton and Essex. This is the circle that she says he belonged to. Then Shakespeare, through his deepening relationship with the Dark Lady, saw the superficiality and imbecility of this. He changed the ending, and thus we get Love's Labour's Lost. So she's like, wow, and I'm thinking as I'm reading this, as a neophyte Shakespeare guy, everything I know about Shakespeare, I basically learn and then immediately turn on the camera and say. So this is how deep of a thing. Luckily, I didn't turn on the camera right after that, because it's like, wow, well that's like pretty big evidence right there that, like, there was two versions of this play, and he changed the play. That shows a kind of a very clear textual thing, except that apparently her only evidence for that comes from this fellow called Francis Maries, who in 1598 had published this book, Pallas Tamara, Wit's Treasury, and in a chapter called A Comparative Discourse on Our English Poets with the Greek, Latin, and Italian Poets, he's the first one to mention that Shakespeare is writing sonnets in print, and he also praised his plays, comparing him to Plotinus and Seneca. And within that thing, he lists a bunch of Shakespeare's plays. Of those, he mentions Love's Labour's Lost, and right after it, Love's Labour's Won. But it's a lost play. We don't have one of the theories is it's a completely lost play. We do not have Love's Labour's Won. There is no evidence what that play was, what it was, that yes, the men basically just proposed at the end and they had a happy ending, and it was a kind of a dud effort from Shakespeare. That is all, as far as I can tell, because Packer doesn't actually give you any footnotes or any evidence. That's all Packer's creation. I started kind of searching stuff for Love's Labour's Lost and Love's Labour's Won. And there's actually a lot of theories about this one play, this Love's Labour's one play. None of them are Packer's theory, though. There's theories that it is indeed just a lost play, kind of sometimes that people would write, they would write one play and then they would write a companion play. It wouldn't necessarily have the same characters in it, but it would be a theme of like, okay, here is when the love didn't go well, and here's where the love did go well, or something like that. Another theory is that it is actually one of Shakespeare's surviving plays. Much Ado About Nothing, I think, is one of the leading contenders, but there's other ones as well. The Royal Shakespeare Company actually did do a production of Much Ado About Nothing, but using a Much Ado About Nothing, but called it Love's Labour's One, as sort of this is the lost play that people are talking about. So it's one of those things where you get into books like Tina Packer, and if you're not a Shakespeare, someone who's already into Shakespeare and knows all the kind of the theories, because I start going like, well, how much do we actually know about Shakespeare? And I mean, I sort of twigged into this beforehand. I didn't go into this book completely blind, but we don't actually know a hell of a lot about Shakespeare. And indeed, if you look at a lot of kind of actual kind of records on him, there's like gaps in his Shakespeare. After the arrival of his twins in 1585, there's nothing surely known about his activities, how he earned a living when he moved from Stratford to London, or how he got his start in the theatre. His next mention is in 1592 as an established London actor, playwright, being mocked as a shake scene. This you get big, and you think you know about that on BookTube. You actually get big enough that someone actually notice you and starts making fun of you or yelling at you. That's how it's a measure of success. If you start getting the hate, then and it's like, Shakespeare got the hate, so this is where he's starting to actually get some traction in there and stuff like that. So when we go back to Shakespeare and saying, oh, well, Shakespeare, he joined this society and he met the Dark Lady and all this stuff. And like he was writing the poems for this is all theory. This is all Packer going, this is what's going to match my theory. So I'm going to fill it in. I have a quote from her, which unfortunately it comes from somebody else's. It comes from somebody else's kind of review. It's a Kate Bassell Theater Topics. I'll leave the little link down below. It's actually just the first couple of paragraphs of her review because I'm on a budget and all this stuff is, so much stuff is paywalled. But she's saying, like, there's no question that Packer is a Shakespeare scholar in her own right, but her individual chapters do not have footnotes or reference lists. Bibliography is provided at the end of the book. It is hard to find the original source for her claims. She does defend her scholarship. Quote, when people ask me, how do you know that? I often don't know how I know. And the truth is, I could be wrong, but it's what my intuition tells me. I somehow know it. End quote. So, and she finishes up with, Packer is a font of Shakespearean knowledge, but this defense is not necessarily one that would hold in other circumstances regarding source material. It's sort of a thing of, I'm making it up because I feel like it's true, which is an odd thing for, I'm a naive reader. It's like, is this a book? Is this a nonfiction book? You shouldn't be making stuff up, right? That said, and in Tina Packer's defense, that actually seems to be a tradition when you get into something like Shakespeare. Shakespeare is someone we know so little about, and people want to read into his plays, want to kind of come up with their own theories, that there seems to be almost a little bit of an agreement that if you're going to write a book on Shakespeare, well, there's no way you're going to actually be able to make a thick book on Shakespeare because we only know maybe that amount on him. So you're going to have to kind of come up with your own stuff. In another review, I looked at a lot of reviews because when I'm reading a nonfiction book and I can't trust the author, I start getting really anxious and I like, okay, I need to research. Can I trust this person? I'm and this is a quote that I got, which I'm gonna probably view this book from now on under. It actually comes from yet another review, another wiser head than mine. It's from the Wall Street Journal, from Ruth Skur, who opens up her review noting a quote from Michael Holroyd, who says that because of our scant information about what we actually know about Shakespeare, all biographies of Shakespeare end up being they end up writing sophisticated autobiographies. Is really what happens. Is the authors. This is Tina Packer's sophisticated autobiography. And I think it is sophisticated. It's a wonderful creation. She does come up with like really interesting insights into Shakespeare. But when she starts talking about Shakespeare's life, I think I'm learning a lot more about Tina Packer than I am learning about Shakespeare. And you know what? I don't think we could ever actually, with the amount of documentation, with the amount of information we have, I don't think we can really know. If anyone starts talking to you like they know everything about what Shakespeare was doing, that, Love's Labour's Lost is his second try at a play that he started off with, and it had a stupid ending. It's like that sort of tells you more about the person who is writing that than it does anything about Shakespeare himself. So yeah. So that sophisticated autobiography is how I will go forward with this book. I'm not going to rag on it because it does seem like this is a tradition in Shakespeare books. This is a kind of the accepted thing of, we get to do our theories. This is going to tell you, I'm enjoying this. It tells me more about you. It's like awesome on her. She wants to find the feminine. She wants to get deeper into the female characters, into the way that Shakespeare viewed women. But I'm probably a lot of the stuff that's like, this is Shakespeare did this, Shakespeare did that, I'm going to take with an incredible grain of salt, probably flipping open what I can find is just like, okay, here are documented facts that we actually know about Shakespeare. It's a kind of a challenging read that way because I still am sort of a naive reader in the sense of like, it's a nonfiction book. This should all be true, right? There's somebody who fact checked this and said, oh no, Tina, we don't know that. So you can't put that in your book. It's like, no, Tina Packer's, and the truth is I could be wrong, but it's what my intuition tells me. I somehow know it. I somehow know that Tina Packer feels that that's how it is, but that's not how it is, most likely. Or, it could be, but it could also be, the Doctor Who. I'll put the quote, I'll put the clip down below of the Doctor Who version of Love's Labour's Won. That is the canonical thing. It's space witches calling down the apocalypse. Is actual Love's Labour's Won. That theory unfortunately might be as valid as this one. Well, maybe not quite. Maybe Tina Packer's a bit higher than that, but you have to think it's one of these fun mysteries. Shakespeare mysteries apparently is a thing, and Love's Labour's Lost, Love's Labour's Won is one of those mysteries. That said, because I was like, okay, I really wanted to read about Love's Labour's Lost from somebody who's maybe kind of examining kind of different kind of critical theories. I did go to Emma Smith. I didn't actually go to this because as I said, Love's Labour's Lost isn't in here, but she has a podcast where basically I feel like it's the chapters that went into this are in in each individual podcast, as I said last time, with her which one was it? With her King John chapter, that basically her kind of theories on that came of that podcast version went into the chapter version. And Love's Labour's Lost is another one that she talks about on her podcast. And she starts out with saying that, Love's Labour's Lost is one of these plays that has drawn a lot of theories. It seems to invite, because it's such a kind of, in some ways, it's such a kind of a light comedy with this kind of a weird dark ending that has invited a lot of kind of critical response. People are surprised that, it actually does work as a play. She talks about, oh, there's this Love's Labour's one, and is it like, is it just one of the other plays that's sort of like been written as a diptych because some people feel like, oh, or they just feel like it needs a sequel. That, wow, we just kind of cut off and we don't get the fulfillment of them coming together at the end. She talks about how this is a play, because there isn't that much of a plot. It's very much a play about language, of how you get the kind of the courtly language, you get the kind of the weird, eccentric Spaniard or Armado's language, you get the malpropisms of Costard, you get all the kind of Latinate stuff. You get there's that super long word, which she says is like, this apparently this proves that Francis Bacon was at least had a hand in writing the play. That's what she says. That's one of the theories. She doesn't actually endorse that herself. Yeah, she talks about how that, in 2014, the Royal Shakespearean Company used Love's Labour's One as a title for Much Ado About Nothing, and kind of used the two plays to, they set them in pre-World War I and post-World War I, as sort of, kind of, we have kind of the happiness of the beginning of Love's Labour's Lost, which kind of goes into, death, and like we get the war, and then as we come out after the war, and you get Much Ado About Nothing, which is like, it's a changed time. It's not only the men who've changed, but it's the time that's changed. We've shifted. We're sadder, we're maybe wiser, that sort of idea. There's, talking about, she actually has a really interesting section here, which it sort of twigged in my mind, which is, and that's just with King Navarre. That Navarre is a name that rang a bell because I'd been kind of looking at all the sectarian conflict of the Protestants and the Catholics. And Navarre is a name that is connected with the Saint Bartholomew's massacre in Paris. In see, now I got to find my little slip of paper. I am the most unorganized dope there is. I can pause. I'm back with my little scrap of paper. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, which was a massacre of French Huguenots in Paris in 1572, which was, I don't know if it's allegedly approved, plotted by Catherine de' Medici, whose daughter, Margaret of France, was being married to Henry of Navarre, the future Henry IV of France, and he had converted from Protestantism to Catholicism, and there was on the eve of that, there was in that time there was a massacre going, and you have kind of the Catholic apologists saying it was like, maybe 2,000 people had been killed, up to, the other big end of the thing was like 70,000 of Protestants were killed within it. It's your most nasty of sectarian violence, where it was basically welcomed by this. It was like celebrated by King Philip of Spain, and the Pope at the time actually struck a medal celebrating the massacre. It's like really, really not Protestantism and Catholicism's not very best hour. It's just, the ugliest of stuff. But this was a real hammer blow to Protestants everywhere, especially in Protestant England, where there was a lot of support, and Henry had been seen as kind of a great hope for the Protestants, and his conversion to Catholicism was not he was seen as an oath breaker, which you get into this play. You have a king who is continually breaking. He vows never to see women, but he breaks that oath. And indeed, at the end, the Princess of France doesn't want, I don't want your word. Your word isn't good enough. You have to actually go off and do stuff for a year to prove yourself to me. So Emma Smith in her podcast talks about this. It's like, well, you have this kind of light, fluffy comedy, but it's like you've got Bush and Blair, or I don't know, or you've got Trump and all these kind of very inflammatory, horrible, not horrible, very charged political names in the middle of your light, frothy comedy. Now, Smith is like, could this be seen as a kind of a coding? Is this an allegory for something of the massacre or something like that? Or is it just simply to kind of make a more of a contrast of like how light and fluffy this is, where you've got Osama bin Laden in your romantic comedy, but he's just being a wacky dude. It's like that kind of a charged, those kind of charged names in your thing, which is like, it's bizarre. Well, it's interesting. It's interesting at the very least. So Smith comes up with a lot of different varied readings to this, which I have to say, maybe I'm not gonna do this every week, but just it's interesting where you have somebody who's got an overriding idea of how they want this story of Shakespeare to play out, where I think I find it more useful someone saying, here is the text, here are many various readings of the text, who knows which one is correct, here is the actual text, let's read it, let's examine the language, we actually have this is something we actually have, this is not just a little list in some other book where we're going to project all our kind of thoughts or our preconceived ideas into it. And it's one of these things of like, this is definitely a dude play in the sense that it's a play about dudes having to grow up. So I agree with Packer there that this is a play, that's not really about the, kind of making rich female characters. It's not really about making rich male characters. It's a light comedy. But the general thrust of it throughout the thing is, I'm being courtly love and I'm showing off all my awesome language and stuff like that. And at the end going, oh, okay, I have to actually kind of ground myself, Barone, being the main kind of the uber example of courtly wit and using all his intelligence to kind of show off and look awesome. It's like, no, at the end, it's like, you go off into the world and you try and bring a smile to a dying man. Use your intelligence, use your language to do that, to bring something of joy into the world. That'll be of actual use. If you're going to use your language, it's funny. It's like you wonder if this is, you can see, now I'm projecting my own stuff, but it's like having a playwright talk about how one of the main characters in this book shouldn't just use his language to, say, hey, I'm awesome. I can speak most wonderfully. It's like to say, no, go in and people who are your plays, your words should elicit forth some kind of a comfort, some kind of a deepening to your hearers. It's like it's less focused on yourself and more, what are you going to bring to this world? Which, that is richer to me. That is showing kind of, a little bit of a deepening of an artist's art right there. So yeah, Women of Will, it's gonna be a challenging read, but I enjoy challenging reads. I won't do this with every play. I'm just going to try and read this book, and I guess if things come up and that grind my gears, I will say them. I'll just comment more on Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading and the other people who are doing a read along of this book, and I'm bet they're glad they didn't invite me along. I'm just buzzing at the edges there because I might be a broken one of those. You get those people going, but what about this? But what about this? It's like I think I'd be very annoying. So this was my very annoying video on this. And yes, we'll get more videos later. Hey, I had to tape this early because, oh God, the last Sunday I taped way too many videos all in a row, and I think I broke myself. So this one I might put up on Saturday. Who knows? I hope you are enjoying Shakespeare. I really am enjoying Shakespeare. I'm enjoying what Shakespeare gets people to do. This is a prime example, I think, of, you get the kind of the Shakespeare, the author theories, like, oh, Shakespeare didn't write his plays, or, encoded messages in Shakespeare, or, all that stuff. That is a part of what Shakespeare brings out in people. So I think it's a really good thing to highlight in these Shakespeare videos. Is if you read a biography of Shakespeare, think about whether you're reading a sophisticated autobiography of the author. Think about that as you're reading. I will leave a quote. I will leave a link down below to it's Shakespeare Documented, Folger EDU, which is an independent research library on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., with the largest collection of works of William Shakespeare and a repository for rare materials from the early modern period. And they have, it's not like the whole, every document is like completely done, but they have good examples of, here is the stuff we actually know about Shakespeare. Here is the documentation. Even stuff just like, he was probably born in April 23rd, 1564, because that's the traditional date given for his birth. However, that's only because they have a baptismal thing for a William Shakespeare from like April 26th, that says that a William Shakespeare was baptized on this day. So they don't actually know even what day William Shakespeare was born. If you want to get into, the nitty gritty of all that stuff, you may or you may not. Half the time I don't give a bloody hell. I just want to read the damn plays and do that stuff. But if it's something that interests you, take a look at Shakespeare Documented. It's an interesting site where you can get an idea of the original documents of Shakespeare, if that's interesting. They also have like kind of front pieces of a lot of his plays, like the First Folio and all those, and that stuff. Like Love's Labour's Lost is apparently one of the first plays that actually had Shakespeare's name on the front of it. A lot of the plays were published and they didn't even have his name on the front, which I'm sure, makes Shakespeare conspiracy theorists of, he didn't write his own plays happy. And and you know what? Maybe they're right because they feel it, or because I feel it. I don't know. All right. I get very excited about all this stuff. More videos later.